Right now, a man over 50 is doing something kind for a woman and quietly losing her respect while he does it. He isn't being foolish. He isn't being weak. He's doing exactly what he was taught a good partner does: giving, adjusting, accommodating, making things easier for her. And that's precisely why he doesn't see what's happening underneath it. Because kindness and self-erasure can look identical from the outside. And almost nobody ever teaches men over 50 the difference between the two. You've had decades to build habits that worked when you were younger. Habits built around proving yourself, around earning a place. Some of those habits quietly turned into something else along the way, and you likely haven't noticed because they still feel like love when you're doing them. There are 10 specific things senior men do, believing they're being good to a woman, that actually cost them her respect in slow motion. The 10th one is the most disguised of all. It doesn't look like weakness. It looks like devotion. By the end of this video, you'll be able to recognize exactly which of these you're already doing and how to stop without becoming cold, guarded, or someone you don't want to be either. Saying sorry can be kindness. Said enough times, it becomes a confession you didn't mean to make. There's a particular kind of apology that has nothing to do with wrongdoing. Psychologists call this appeasement signaling, an automatic verbal habit used to reduce tension before any real conflict has even occurred. You say sorry for having an opinion. You say sorry for wanting a different restaurant. You say sorry simply for existing in a way that takes up a little space. Each instance feels small, almost reflexive, barely worth noticing in the moment it happens. Of course, real apologies matter. Owning an actual mistake is part of being a decent partner, not a flaw. The difference is whether the words are attached to something you actually did wrong, or whether they've become a verbal tick that fires whenever you sense the smallest friction. One apology for forgetting an anniversary means something specific. An apology for simply preferring a different movie means something else entirely. It tells her, without meaning to, that your preferences are negotiable by default. The common mistake is assuming this habit reads as humble. It doesn't. Over time, it reads as a man with no fixed center, apologizing his way out of having one. That one is mostly verbal. The next one is something you do with your entire schedule. She never asked you to cancel anything. You did it before she could, and that's exactly the problem. There's a specific instinct many men develop after 50, especially after years of being told that good partners prioritize their relationships above almost everything else. Researchers who study relationship dynamics describe this as preemptive sacrifice, clearing your own plans, your own time, your own commitments before anyone has actually requested it, simply because you anticipate it might be expected of you eventually. Here's the detail worth noticing. If your golf game, your fishing trip, your weekly dinner with old friends quietly starts disappearing from your calendar the moment a new relationship begins, not because she asked, but because you assumed she'd want it that way, you've removed something valuable without anyone negotiating for it. A life with nothing in it to protect doesn't read as available. It reads as empty. Now, you might be thinking, isn't flexibility just part of being considerate? Sometimes, yes, genuinely. The difference is whether the flexibility is requested or anticipated. Requested flexibility is partnership. Anticipated flexibility, offered before anyone asks, quietly tells her there was nothing in your schedule worth fighting to keep. Canceling your time is one thing. Handing over your opinions is something else entirely. Agreement feels peaceful. Too much of it starts to feel like nobody's actually there. Constant agreement, even on small matters, which restaurant, which show, which weekend plan, can look like compatibility from the outside. But conflict researchers describe a pattern called preference suppression, where a person stops voicing genuine opinions specifically to avoid even minor friction, often without realizing they're doing it. The disagreements don't disappear. They just stop being spoken out loud. Picture the specific moment this shows up. She asks where you'd like to eat, 3 separate times across 3 separate weeks. And each time you say, wherever you want is fine, with the same easy smile, the same absence of any real preference. One instance of that is simply easygoing. A consistent pattern of it removes any sense that a distinct, opinionated person exists across the table from her. The common mistake is believing that agreement equals harmony. Often, what it actually creates is the quiet impression that there's no one fully present to disagree with. And that absence is harder to notice than conflict, and harder to fix once she stopped expecting an opinion from you at all. If your opinions go quiet, your finances are usually next. Generosity and anxiety can look identical from the outside. Only one of them earns respect. There's a specific habit many senior men fall into: paying for absolutely everything, every time, often before she's even reached for her wallet. Behavioral economists who study status signaling describe this as compensatory spending, an unconscious attempt to prove worth through money when a man feels uncertain about his worth in other areas. It often intensifies, not decreases, the more financially comfortable a man becomes. Here's what this actually looks like in practice. If you insist on paying for every dinner, every outing, every small purchase, and visibly tense up or rush to intervene the moment she even gestures toward her own purse, the message underneath isn't generosity. It's anxiety dressed up as confidence. Of course, paying sometimes, generously and naturally, is simply part of courtship and partnership at any age. The difference is whether it flows from ease or from a need to prove something every single time the bill arrives. The common mistake here is assuming more spending equals more value. Often it reads as the opposite, a quiet signal that you believe your bank account is doing work your character should be doing instead. Money is one form of overcompensation. Your phone is another. Replying instantly feels considerate. After a while, it starts to feel like you have nothing else going on. There's a specific compulsive pattern that emerges in many relationships after 50. Instant responsiveness to every single text, regardless of what you're doing, regardless of the hour. Psychologists studying digital availability call this hyper-responsiveness, the unconscious habit of treating every message as equally urgent, which quietly signals that nothing in your life is more important than the device in your hand. Picture the specific scene. You're out with old friends, mid-conversation, and her text arrives. And within seconds, your phone is out, your attention has left the room, your friends watch you disappear into the screen without a second thought. One instance of that is simply being polite. A consistent pattern of it tells her, without a single word, that your own life has no competing demands at all. Remember what I told you at the start, that there was one habit men do, believing it's kindness, when it's actually the most disguised form of self-erasure there is. We're getting closer to it, but it isn't this one yet. The common mistake is assuming instant replies prove devotion. Often, what they prove instead is the absence of anything else worth your attention. Your time is one resource men give away too easily. Your appearance is the next. Saying looks don't matter anymore is comforting. It's also one of the more convincing lies men tell themselves after 50. There's a quiet rationalization many senior men adopt. The belief that physical self-care stops mattering once a relationship has settled into comfort. Health psychologists describe ongoing physical upkeep as a form of self-regard signaling, visible evidence that a person still considers themselves worth maintaining, independent of anyone else's attention. Here's the specific detail worth noticing. The shift is rarely dramatic. It's the haircut that gets pushed back another month, the same worn clothes worn slightly too often, the gym membership quietly going unused, each decision small and defensible on its own. Of course, no one should chase an impossible standard, and aging is not a flaw to apologize for. The difference is between graceful aging and quiet resignation. One says, I still take care of myself. The other says, it no longer matters whether I do. The common mistake is mistaking self-neglect for maturity. It rarely reads that way to her. It usually reads as a man who has stopped believing his own presence is worth presenting well. How you treat your body is one signal. How you talk about your past is another. You didn't lie about your life. You just got quieter about it, one conversation at a time. There's a specific habit that develops in some men after 50. minimizing their own achievements, history, or past relationships to avoid making a new partner uncomfortable. Researchers who study identity in relationships describe this as narrative self-erasure, the gradual shrinking of one's own story to keep the emotional temperature low for someone else. Picture this scene. A friend brings up something you once built, achieved, or survived. And instead of letting the story breathe, you deflect it quickly, downplay it, change the subject before she can ask a follow-up question. Of course, humility is admirable, and nobody wants a partner who talks only about himself. The difference is between humility and disappearance. Humility shares the story briefly and moves on. Disappearance avoids the story altogether, every single time it surfaces. The common mistake is believing this keeps the peace. It often does the opposite. A man with no visible past becomes a man with very little present weight in the relationship either. Erasing your past is subtle. Abandoning your friendships is not. Nobody told you to choose. You just kept choosing her every time until there was nothing left to choose between. There's a specific pattern that emerges quietly in new relationships after 50. Old friendships fading, one missed call at a time, as a new relationship absorbs more and more of a man's social bandwidth. Social psychologists describe this as relationship enmeshment, where one connection expands until it crowds out the external relationships that once gave a person perspective and support. Here's what this looks like in practice. The monthly dinner with old friends becomes quarterly, then becomes a text that says, "Let's reschedule," sent so many times that eventually no one bothers rescheduling at all. Of course, a new relationship deserves real time and attention. That's simply part of building something serious. The difference is whether old friendships are being balanced or quietly liquidated to fund the new relationship entirely. The common mistake is assuming this sacrifice proves commitment. It often does the opposite. A man with no outside friendships left has no outside perspective left either, and that isolation rarely reads as romantic. It usually reads as a warning sign she notices long before you do. Friendships fade quietly. The next habit happens loudly, in front of other people. Loyalty to her matters. So does noticing when loyalty has quietly become blindness. There's a specific dynamic that creates lasting damage in families, reflexively defending a partner against every concern your own children or siblings raise, regardless of whether the concern has any merit. Family therapists describe this as loyalty conflation, mistaking total agreement with a partner for genuine loyalty, when real loyalty actually includes the willingness to hear legitimate concerns without immediately dismissing them. Picture the specific scene. Your daughter mentions, carefully, that she's noticed something that concerns her, and instead of simply listening, you respond defensively within seconds, shutting the conversation down before she's finished a single sentence. Of course, not every family concern is valid. Sometimes children resist any new relationship out of their own discomfort, not genuine red flags. The difference is whether you're capable of telling those two things apart, or whether every concern gets the same automatic dismissal, regardless of its substance. The common mistake is believing total defense proves devotion. It often instead proves to your family that they've lost a working relationship with your judgment, a kind of trust that once broken this way rarely returns at the same depth it once had. 9 of these are visible if someone points them out. The 10th one looks like love itself. This isn't about doing less for her. This is about becoming less, one quiet accommodation at a time. There's a final pattern underneath everything we've covered today, the one that ties all 9 previous habits together into a single root cause. Psychologists who study long-term partner dynamics describe this as voluntary self-diminishment, consistently downplaying your own ambition, confidence, opinions, or presence, specifically to avoid ever appearing threatening or larger than the relationship itself. Here's the specific shape it takes. You stop mentioning a goal you're working toward because it might sound like bragging. You soften your own confidence in group settings so you never outshine her, even slightly, even unintentionally. You shrink your presence in rooms you used to fill naturally, mistaking smallness for considerateness the entire time it's happening. Of course, no one is suggesting you dominate every conversation or compete with your own partner for attention. That would be its own kind of problem. The difference is between graceful confidence and disappearing on purpose. And the line between them is easy to cross without noticing exactly when it happened. This is it. This is the 10th habit, the one disguised as humility, the one that costs more respect than almost anything else on this list. Once you can see this 10th habit, the other 9 start to look like rehearsals for it. These 10 habits aren't really 10 separate mistakes scattered across a relationship. They're 10 expressions of the same underlying instinct, the belief that love requires shrinking, that devotion means disappearing a little more each year, that a good partner is measured by how much of himself he's willing to give away. The deeper truth underneath all of it is simpler than it sounds. Respect was never built by becoming smaller. It was built by remaining someone worth choosing in the first place. You don't need to overcorrect into coldness or distance to fix any of this. That overcorrection causes its own kind of damage. What you need is awareness of where the line sits between generosity and erasure, between humility and disappearance, between loyalty and blindness, so you can give generously without giving yourself away entirely. Which of these 10 habits did you recognize in yourself first, and how long had you been doing it before you noticed? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them, and they genuinely shape what we cover next on this channel. Next time, we'll cover the one sentence a woman uses to test whether a man has any of these habits, often within the first few weeks.